Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Inner Changemaker. I am so stoked to be here with you guys, and we got a guest for you. He is an author. He's already written 2 books, but we're here to talk about his new one, which he is doing a crowdfunding campaign for, which is really a coffee table book. And I love the name of it, is Play for a Living, a coffee table book for your inner genius. And we got Charlie Hoehn on the Inner Changemaker, so really excited about this. Charlie, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, Jay. Happy to be here.
Yeah.
And here's the book as well.
There's the book. You got it live in the flesh. Well, I know we were trying to connect for a little while, and there's so many different things happening in your life, and so many different things happening over here. So I'm glad we actually finally got to connect. I want to say congratulations, right?
Thank you.
For you guys getting funded. I think I saw the email in like a day and a half or something.
Yeah, it was a day and a half. Yeah, it was a really nice surprise.
Yeah. So how did that feel? Because I was following your email campaign. I was following your trailers and stuff. How did that feel to have that happen within like the first day and a half?
Honestly, it was a relief because it was not like pure elation. It was relief because I've so my wife is pregnant, right? We have our first baby coming in June, so a couple months from now.
Yeah.
And this book that I've been working on for a few years, we wrapped it up recently, and I realized I'm not going to be able to launch this after my kid is born because I'm not going to have the energy. I won't want to do it because I got a full-time gig. I got other stuff going on. So I have to launch this thing. And everyone I spoke with said, you have to get the first 30% funding in the first 3 days. Yeah. Otherwise, the project will either fail or it's going to be a tense ride the entire time. So It was a huge relief to break through the goal so quickly.
That's incredible. And I know this is your first crowdfunded book, right? Mm-hmm. Because I know you had Play It Away and you had the recession proof one that you came out with. And so, I mean, it's really interesting. For people that might not know you, and maybe I can paint a little bit of context here. Charlie, I was just mentioning, I've been following you for, this is the first time we're meeting, but I've been, like, I heard about Charlie, I think when you were working with Tim Ferriss at the time. And I think he wrote an article about how to actually reach out to people, how to actually create relationships, how to get like an internship and, how to do all that. And then, I know you've worked with Ramit and I know you're working with like Tucker, and you just worked with literally some of the world's like best in terms of like books, in terms of thought leaders. And I always just really admired the way that I guess you kind of creatively reached out to people and was able to build those relationships. Right. A common question I always get is like, how do you get the people that come on your show? And, part of that is like, part of that inspiration is looking at people like you and looking at the work that you guys do and actually building those relationships. But I'm always super curious because when you got a chance to work with like Ramit and Tim and like you kind of like entered that world of, these influencers that you got a chance to connect with. How did those relationships, like how did that experience like help you become kind of like the entrepreneur you are today? Because there's a bit of a gap from when you first got out of school to what you're doing now. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And first off, thank you, Jay, for saying that. That means a lot. And so how did the experiences of working with them shape who I am today is the question. So I mean, they all shaped who I am today in different ways. The first person I had a digital internship was Seth Godin, and he literally started everything. He said, you got to start a blog. Everybody who's here has to start a blog. And at the time, it was 2008. I had just gotten out of college. I thought a blog was a very dorky, nerdy thing to do.
Sure.
I didn't want to do that. So I did it, but I kept it secret for several months. And I was just writing and I didn't really think I had much to say. And, that snowballed into pretty much every other opportunity, right? From that point forward, I officially had a place that I could point to and say, you can look at my work there. You can see my thinking there. So, for everyone, I think everyone should at least own their domain.com or .me or .blog or whatever, and have something there that people can look at, because no one has any idea how you can help them. Even if you explain, they're like, well, don't tell me, show me, right? This is why everybody gets lost in job application and resume piles. It's because there's no way to show. You're just talking and basically lying, exaggerating about what you can do for them. So that made, crazily, I think between 6 and 9 months of writing on my blog, I actually found out that Tucker Max was one of my very first readers. He was one of the first 24 readers or something. And I think he discovered me because I did the digital internship with Seth Godin. So he looked me up and started kind of following what I was doing. And I reached out to Ramit Sethi around that time and offered to help him with some video work. And he and I started working together and doing video projects together. And I reached out to Tucker, and Tucker brought me on to help him with a little bit of marketing. And then he said, why don't you be the videographer for my movie tour? And they both recommended me to Tim Ferriss. Now, keep in mind, I was doing this all from my parents' basement in Colorado, on the ping pong table where the old family computer was. This wasn't. I was just hustling. I knew no one like this, right? These guys just make believe to me. They were so talking to them and hearing their voices over the phone was very exciting and terrifying too at times. Yeah. So it's like, how is this happening? So to answer your question, how did they shape me into who I am today? They made me realize we're all connected. Anything's possible, and you can connect with anybody if you come to them as an equal. Not that I was equal in their sense of like who could provide more value, but I came to them as approaching them as a partner and saying, look, I have all this energy, I have all this time, I have all this enthusiasm that I can dump into whatever you suggest, but here's what I recommend we work on, because this is what I think is going to have the biggest impact. And these are what my skills can really contribute to. So the biggest lesson, I think, is it's possible to work with anybody. And they shaped me in that regard more than anything else. You can pitch anybody and make stuff happen for yourself. You can create opportunities, get your foot in the door.
Yeah.
And that's reality. They changed my life because of that.
Well, I wanted to start there because, it's just been really incredible to see you kind of team up with, sometimes we look at these people that we really look up to, whether they're influencers or authors or athletes, and it's like they're so unreachable. And you've really been able to not just partner with them, but really develop your message along the way and develop your brand and, develop, your videos, your vlogs. So it's just been really cool to kind of see because now, like, you have this amazing crowdfunding campaign, but I know you also, recently, or I saw recently that, you spoke on the TEDx stage. And it's all around this idea of scheduling play, and it's all around this ethos of, by playing, it's gonna help you actually grow your business, and it's gonna actually, not just even about the business context, it's about everything. How did you first kind of go over and discover that for yourself? Like the idea of play, because I know that's a huge part of your message.
Yeah. I discovered the importance of play through, I went through a period of burnout. So I worked with Tim for 3 years and overall, amazing experiences, just life-changing job, right? It was a dream job. And I really tried to get as much as I could out of each moment. At some point along the journey, and I wrote about this and Play It Away, it's a longer story, but at some point I kind of shifted my mentality from, wow, isn't this such a fun, exciting job? And isn't this great that I get to work on these opportunities to, how can I make money? How can I make the most out of my time? How can I be maximum productive? And I kind of just shifted into this serious output mode, where I was, drinking 3 to 5 cups of coffee a day. I was going to bed at 2 a.m., waking up at 6, doing email constantly, just constantly putting aside quality time with friends in order to be better at my job. And I was really good at my job. I mean, Tim wasn't like cracking the whip on me, metaphorically speaking, or literally.
Yeah. For the record.
Right. Because I was working remotely a lot of the time, but I just wanted to be great at my job. And there were times where it did require, like, I have to be 5 people all at the same time,
sure.
For an extended period. And I had a number of events go, sour in my personal life. There were deaths in the family, suicide attempts by friends, and I just kind of hit an emotional wall, and I decided I needed to take some time off. And I actually ended up quitting because I just was so fragile. And I just didn't really, like, my body felt different fundamentally. I felt like I was afraid when I would interact with people. There was just this shift to intense anxiety that I'd never really experienced. And I went and worked at another app startup a few months later. We did really well, but it got even worse. I was getting panic attacks, and I had to quit that job too because I was getting even worse, and so I spent the next year or so just trying everything to get out of this state of anxiety. Like, secretly, I didn't tell anybody, but secretly I was doing yoga, meditation, deep breathing, every type of therapy you could list, journaling, exercising, supplements, drugs, everything, and nothing really worked. And I sort of just felt very deflated because I thought, man, maybe life is just kind of like this, and it's a joyless grind. And the way I discovered Play was just by accident. I came across a book called Play by Stuart Brown at my friend's house. And I sat down and I read the book in one sitting. And the book is a phenomenal read. I'd recommend it to everybody. It's Play by Stuart Brown. And it talks about the biological and the evolutionary benefits of play. Like, why do human beings play more than basically any other species? Why do we, play is actually essential to our survival. It allows us to learn. It allows us to explore our environment. It allows us to bond with others. Safely, because when you're playing, they're not a threat. It allows you to practice these fight or flight survival skills in a safe way. And play is one of these amazing things where you can deprive somebody of work. You can say, don't work, and they'll be like, great, I won't, no problem. You can tell that to a kid, like, don't go to school, and they will not work. They will, however, play. You cannot, when you deprive a human being of play, they develop social and emotional handicaps. They grow up to be to develop severe mental illness. And that's actually the story behind how Stuart Brown wrote that book. Is he was actually brought in by the government to study serial killers, mass murderers, and find out what it is that they had in common. And the thing that he noticed after interviewing a lot of them is they had childhoods that were severely deprived of play. of play opportunities where they get to be themselves, do their own thing, not get judged, not get shamed, not any of this nonsense that has sort of creeped into our public school system, where we tell kids to sit still, do this thing for hours and hours that you don't want to do. It's super boring. You wouldn't do it on your own ever. So play, I sort of discovered, is this essential component, and it made me realize why I got into those jobs in the first place was because I wanted to do stuff that was fun and enjoyable. And so I just thought to myself, man, I just do not play anymore. So I'm just going to try reintroducing that into my life 15, 20 minutes a day. And just so instead of going to a coffee shop and drinking coffee with somebody, I would go play catch with them at the park. And, I started signing up for groups like basketball and improv. And improv was really pivotal for me because it taught me that people who are playful, they don't constantly say no to things. They don't constantly criticize themselves. They don't constantly criticize others. They're not worried about the outcome. They're not worried about being productive. They just go with the flow. They say yes to everything. And that is a common thing that you hear, actually, or that you can read in spiritual texts, is say yes to everything, and your unhappiness kind of goes away. And so I started doing improv and all more and more play into my life. And within a month, I was just sort of back to normal. I was happy again. I didn't notice any symptoms of anxiety whatsoever. I didn't even really notice it because the change was so gradual that it wasn't like an abrupt fix by any means. But it was like, man, that worked better than literally every prescribed form of medication or therapy that I've come across. Why the hell isn't this in the mental health section? And so it really frustrated me that I'd been exposed to either very risky and dangerous therapies or very expensive therapies when it could be very cheap and fun and free. So I wrote a post called How I Cured My Anxiety 4 years ago. And that's been the #1 search result on Google if you type in anxiety cure. So I get a lot of people around the world who are struggling with anxiety because it's one of the most common illnesses, and it can be debilitating. People don't understand. I hear people casually like throw out like, "Oh my gosh, I'm going to have a panic attack." It's like, no, you're not. You don't know what that feels like. You don't know what it's like to check yourself into an emergency room because you think you're having a heart attack and going insane. Like it is, there's very intense periods of anxiety, and there's just frankly not a lot of great advice out there that's practical, that works quickly, that's sustainable. So that's why I wrote Play It Away. Was after the response to that blog post blew up, I decided I wanted to have something that people could return to and kind of share my whole story. Yeah.
Well, it's fascinating, Charlie, because even as you're talking, even as you're explaining, it's really fascinating. Even like as you're saying, oh, like I joined improv. Like I can imagine, just my mind, I had a bit of anxiety right now of like, well, I don't know how I have time, right? Like and I can imagine every overachiever, every like entrepreneur that's like, trying to like make it happen is doing that. So what are maybe like the common things when you tell people, dude, you gotta play, you gotta put down the laptop, you gotta go outside, play catch. What's like the reaction that you typically get when you're trying to like break it down for people?
Well, so you had the reaction of anxiousness, basically. So my prescription is never just sign up for improv. The improv's not right for everybody. Some people hate improv, and I don't blame them, right? So improv is a part of who I am because that's who I was growing up. So what I ask everybody is, what were the activities that you repeatedly and voluntarily turned to when you were a kid that no one was forcing you to do? No one was grading you. No one was paying you. You weren't being rewarded by anything but your own internal paycheck. The joy that you felt, the fascination that you experienced. Like, what were those things for you, Jay, when you were growing up?
We loved going hiking a lot. because every summer that's like kind of like camping, hiking. We do some combination of that. There was a lot of like summer camps in my childhood. Wasn't too much like into reading. This is another thing, right? Like, not that this is like a tangent, but like, there was a really good friend of mine, Saul Orwell, who you might also know as well.
Yeah.
He made like this really great Facebook post a little while ago, and he said, "Why in the world are people saying like, if you can, the question of like, if you're on an island, you know what I mean? What are like the 3 books you bring with you?" And every entrepreneur, like without fail, like 9 out of 10, they'll pick business books. They'll pick like exactly, right? And it's like, are you serious? Like for like, what are like the ones that you love reading that you just want to like dive into? Is it like mystery novels? Is it thrillers? Is it like whatever it is, right? Like everyone always feels like they have to be so on. You know what I mean? Like, I read the Napoleon Hill. I read the You know what I mean? Like, and so I don't know. It just made me think about that because people, it's almost like they don't know what they want anymore. Right.
Right. Well, it's like this herd thing that's going on. It's this following thing, and it sucks because people aren't really tapping into who they are anymore because you kind of put on this mask of what you think you need to be, right? And you take your cues from who you see is doing well in your eyes, right?
Right.
And in truth, like a lot of the people that really put themselves out there and go full bore in putting their life on the internet are oftentimes they've got issues themselves, or they're hustling because they really, really need to hustle. So it's not like a good prescription for everybody to follow. That's why I recommend like you have to revisit, you have to remember who you were as a kid, because that is who you are. Like, it's not like you've fundamentally changed a crazy amount. The preferences that you developed when you were young, the things that you found joy in and gave you strength, those things are still there. You just have to tap back into them every now and then. You don't have to spend a bunch of time being somebody that you're not, So, and how many times do we have to learn the lesson, right? That the more you become your authentic self, the more, which, is a squishy word that is loosely defined or whatever, but the more you tap into who you really are and embrace that, the more the world sort of rewards that behavior. Why do you want to be the vanilla version of every other vanilla out there? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I even looking at the book, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening to this and it's resonating with you, if you're like, probably like me, like, or you're like kind of like that overachiever and you don't schedule play, or you think maybe you don't have time for X, for friends, for, for having the things that bring you joy in your life. I would definitely pick up a copy of, Play for a Living, because the way that you guys even put together this book, I don't know if there's like a special link. I know you guys are on Kickstarter right now, and I saw that you had like a massive banner on charliehoehn.com/products.
Yeah.
But even in looking at the way that you put this together, it looked like kind of like a fun, cool way of bringing like some people, some great quotes of people, from, Katharine Hepburn to Bill Murray. Like, you guys have some amazing like artistic drawings here, and just makes it kind of like even fun.
Yeah.
Right? So tell us about a little bit about that process, because I know it's almost like 200 pages, but like, how did you guys even put this together?
Oh my gosh, man. So it took us nearly 3 years to put this book together. And for people watching the video, it's just beautifully designed. And the way that it was done is so originally to promote Play It Away, there's a section in Play It Away where I kind of compiled some of my favorite quotes from the greatest minds I knew, who were talking about how they approach their work as a game. So people like Stan Lee, the guy who created X-Men, the Avengers, Iron Man, Spider-Man, Steve Jobs, obviously, J.K. Rowling, or I guess it's pronounced Rowling. I just found that out. Shigeru Miyamoto, the guy who created Mario, Zelda, Donkey Kong, they're all these creative people who really they view work fundamentally differently than the average person. And not just because the nature of their work is different, but because they bring a different spirit to the work. And that's really what Play for a Living is about, is not thinking of work as work, not thinking of work as some joyless, serious, productive activity that you're trying to escape at the end of the day, or you're trying to get to retirement. Play for a Living is about retaining the childlike qualities that you had when you were playing as a kid, that you really leaned in and had fun in the things that you really enjoyed, and bringing that into your current work. So really just embracing, there's a quote in the book that's, instead of calling it work, realize it as play. And that's a tough thing for a lot of people to kind of grasp initially, right? Because they might have a job that they're just like, my job is not play. You know, I have middle managers staring over my shoulder and grading my work, and it's constantly stressful. My coworkers are gossipy. Insert expletive. There are a lot of work environments that just fundamentally don't do a great job at creating like a playful nature, right? We sit in meetings all day. We sit still. So the book is really it's primarily to remind people, like, look, this other perspective, this other philosophy, this other spirit of approaching work and life is always available to you, and it can have a ripple out effect into the people that you interact with, just like it did with me. I mean, this is why I believe in this so much, is I went from being an anxious mess who was scared to interact with people. And because of that fear, they were wary of me. They were like, what is this dude's issue? And so I kind of thought like everybody's got anxiety, but in reality, your spirit is contagious to others. You know, everybody's a mirror reflecting energy back and forth between each other and communicating on a level that's not just verbal, it's subconscious, you know? So when you start to play with others, when you start to approach them with a playful spirit, when you start to approach your work with a more playful spirit, it changes the people around you. It gives them permission to do that too. And a lot of the times, your very best work, your best ideas will come out of being in that loose, playful, creative state. And those are the ideas that change the world. That's why the subtitle of this book is Quotes from People Who Found Joy in Their Work and Changed the World. So not only are all these people creative and fun-loving, they are people who fundamentally, objectively made our world a better place to live. They created our culture and they shaped our world in a positive way.
For sure. And Charlie, I do have a last couple questions here for you, but is there a place that, I know you guys got some super cool like packages. I took a look earlier today in terms of when people pick up multiple copies of the book and what have you. Do they just go search you guys on Kickstarter? Like where are you sending everyone?
Yeah, so our Kickstarter goes until May 11th, right? So if you're hearing this and it's before May 11th, you want to get on Kickstarter and search for Play for a Living. If it's after May 11th and you're hearing this, then what you're going to go do is type in playforaliving.me in your browser. Okay. And that'll be where we'll have information about how to get it after the Kickstarter.
That's cool. That's cool. You know, one last thing, I do have last couple questions, but I used to work for a company named Strategic Coach. For people that have been following me for a little while, they probably know that with Dan Sullivan. And one of the biggest concepts of Strategic Coach, and this is like literally the first day, like people sign up for like these workshops. It's all for high net worth individuals, right? Everyone's like making X amount of money. You're in a room of successful people. And they go through their time system, which they're infamous for. And one of the days, there's essentially 3 days, right? It's there's buffer days, there's focus days, and then there's free days. And free days is the one thing that people hear and they go, oh, it like perks their, you know, it kind of like they go, oh, well, what's that? Like, tell me a little bit about that. Because these are overworked, you know, entrepreneurs. They're successful. They've been able to achieve great financial wealth, right? But they maybe don't have the relationship that they want with their significant other or their kids, or themselves, or you know what I mean? Like,
right.
And I remember like the face in the room, like when Dan was like, oh, you have to take X amount of days off, and we're talking to like beginner, like try to take 1 day off a week. People are like freaking out, like what's the refund policy? Like it's going crazy. So it's, if you're struggling with this, or you're even thinking, you're like, I don't know how I'm going to fit all this in, you're not alone. And every like overachiever that I've ever come across, like they at some point wrestled with this. And until they made that shift of taking X amount of time off for themselves and being able to rejuvenate and come back with kind of like a clean lens and be able to kind of attack that work, they weren't able to do their best work.
Agreed. Totally agree. And what I'm actually, so for a while, I kind of pursued this idea called the Recess Project, and it was catered to those types of people in those companies who needed time off. That's a hard sell. It is a hard sell because you got to be able to prove, like, look, and like you said, they're asking for refunds, right? Yeah. It is hard to convince a CEO that, hey, if you take some time off, I can boost your sales by X percentage or X number of dollars. So what I'm actually preaching is, look, not specifically in this book, but I talk about it in Play for a Living or Play It Away. You don't have to stop working the way that you are. You don't have to dramatically change anything. What I would suggest, however, is when you have meetings, make them a form of play. Meet up at a rock climbing gym. Meet up for a hike, right? Go play catch in the park. Anything like that can get you two bonding with each other. You could, I've heard of bars. Actually, there's a bar I don't know if it's Toronto. It might have been another, like Vancouver or something. I don't know. Okay. But I remember reading about a bar where they gave Legos to people who came to the bar. So there's really cool. All sorts of things that you can do. But that's the challenge I would give you is write to Jay or me if you decide to do a play meeting and what the results are. I've heard from so many business people, including salespeople at Fortune 500 companies who are like doing extremely well for themselves, saying they've boosted the amount that they make per client, and that they're happier because they're actually good friends. Like I've had people write to me and say, I have clients now that I would have in my wedding because we changed how we communicate. Yeah. Instead of doing cold calls or instead of doing whatever, we have play meetings. So that's the challenge I would give everybody listening to this.
I love it. I love it. So Charlie, I know we're tight on time. One last question here for you. The show itself, it's called the Inner Changemaker. What comes to your mind, if anything, when you hear the word changemaker?
I just think of somebody who just doesn't accept the status quo. There is a lot of stuff that is really messed up about the status quo. And there need to be change makers to break us out of this, of these habits, of these old ways of thinking. And we need rebels, right? We need people who are playful, who are immature, who can poke at those old ways of thinking and those old systems and those old people who do things their old way, because that's what life is about. And you need people to basically kill the old ways, because the old ways deserve to die at some point. So you need those change makers. And again, there's I wonder if I can find it real quick. Just bear with me. There's a quote I have from Tom Robbins actually on this exact thing in the book, which is on changemakers, which says, humanity has advanced not because it's been sober, responsible, and cautious, but because it's been playful, rebellious, and immature. Ooh. And so go be playful, rebellious, and immature if you want to be a change maker. Yeah, you got to go against that status quo. You got to schedule that play. You got to make sure to pick up a copy of Play for a Living with Charlie Hoehn. Charlie, thank you so much, man. I appreciate your time. Thank you, Jay. And appreciate your perspective. We'll see you next time, man. Thank you, man. Take care.